There comes a quiet hour in every life when a person realizes no one is really watching. Not the way they hoped. Not with the understanding they imagined. You can spend years trying to be visible, performing, pleasing, explaining, all in the hope that someone, somewhere, will look at you and finally see. But the truth? The world isn't cruel. It's just busy. Everyone is too entangled in their own storms to notice yours. That silence you feel when you hurt. It's not punishment. It's reality. And if you can accept that, something inside you begins to shift. The Stoics understood this long before us. Marcus Aurelius, sitting in his tent under a gray Roman sky, surrounded by soldiers and uncertainty, wrote to himself, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about your neighbors." He was an emperor of millions, yet he spoke like a man utterly alone. Because even on the throne, he knew, the applause fades. The crowd disperses. The world moves on. What remains is you and your thoughts. What remains is whether your inner kingdom is ruled by discipline or by despair. We are raised to believe that pain deserves recognition. We think if I suffer enough, someone will care. If I cry, they'll understand. If I'm kind enough, they'll stay. But life doesn't work on that currency. No one owes you understanding. No one is required to feel your pain to validate it. That realization feels like betrayal. But it's actually freedom. Because the moment you stop expecting others to carry your suffering, you begin to carry it yourself, and strangely, it becomes lighter. You stop freezing your life waiting for a witness. You stop holding your breath, waiting to be seen. You start breathing again, for yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you." But most people don't ask because they care. They ask so they can fit you into a story that makes sense to them. They don't see you, they see their idea of you, and every time you perform to fit that idea, you lose a little more of your truth. There's a sorrow that comes with realizing you're not the main character in anyone's story, but your own. At first it feels like loneliness. Then if you let it, it becomes clarity. Because when you stop trying to be seen, you finally begin to see yourself. The Stoics called this the death of illusion, the moment when the world stops orbiting your expectations and you must build your own gravity. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for anyone else. He wrote them as private reminders to stay steady when no one was watching. He didn't crave validation, he cultivated virtue. He didn't perform goodness, he practiced it, alone, in silence. That's where the seed of real power lies, not in being noticed, but in being anchored. When you no longer live to be seen, you stop being a shadow in someone else's light. You become the flame itself. It's easy to say no one cares with bitterness, to use it as an excuse to stop trying. But that's not Stoicism. The Stoic doesn't stop caring because others don't. He continues to act with honor, with clarity, with discipline, precisely because no one is watching. That's the test. That's the training ground of the soul. There's a freedom in realizing that the crowd's silence doesn't diminish your worth. Their absence doesn't erase your effort. When applause fades, character begins. And often it's our imagination of how others see us that causes the deepest wounds. We invent judgments that don't exist. We create expectations that no one promised to meet. And when they fail to notice us, we call it pain, when really it's awakening. You were never meant to be seen by everyone. You were meant to be known by yourself. So stop scanning the horizon for acknowledgement. Stop measuring your value by how often someone checks in. Start measuring it by how consistently you show up for yourself. If the world doesn't clap for you today, let that be your meditation. If your message is unheard, let it refine your conviction. If your kindness goes unreturned, let it purify your intention. The Stoics lived by a truth we often forget, that peace doesn't come when others understand you. It comes when you no longer need them to. So sit quietly for a moment. Let the noise fade. Feel that silence, not as abandonment, but as space. The space where strength is born. Because once you stop begging to be seen, you finally become visible to yourself. There's a sound you only hear when the noise finally dies. Not the noise of traffic or chatter, but the constant hum of needing to be noticed. That ache for validation that keeps the mind restless, always reaching, always proving. When that noise fades, what remains isn't emptiness. It's silence, self-possession. At first, silence feels like exile. You reach for your phone. You scroll through faces. You search for proof that you still matter. But slowly, the silence stops feeling like a punishment and starts to feel like a mirror. A mirror that doesn't flatter you, doesn't lie, doesn't perform. In that reflection, you begin to see how much of your identity was shaped by noise, by opinions, by attention, by the need to be included. And when that scaffolding falls, you finally meet the person who's been underneath it all along. This is where solitude begins its real work. Not in isolation from the world, but in reconnection with yourself. Epictetus said, "Freedom," he meant, "isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of dependence." It's not the world's silence that liberates you. It's the realization that you no longer need its applause. Picture Marcus Aurelius again, not as an emperor on a throne, but as a man alone in a tent, his candle flickering against the canvas. Outside, the empire breathes and burns. Inside, he writes quietly, reminding himself not to let victory, loss, or fame invade his inner peace. He was surrounded by armies, yet his truest battles were fought in silence. We live in a world that fears that kind of stillness. We fill every pause with noise, every moment of discomfort with distraction. But the Stoics saw silence not as absence, but as presence. They believed that solitude sharpens the soul, the way friction sharpens a blade. Without it, we remain dull, defined only by what others reflect back to us. There's a moment, and you will know it when it arrives, when you stop feeling lonely and start feeling sovereign, when the solitude that once frightened you becomes your sanctuary, when you no longer crave constant confirmation because you've started to trust your own perception. That's when life begins to change quietly. You start listening, really listening, to the rhythm of your own thoughts. Not the loud, anxious ones that echo what the world expects from you, but the quiet, steady voice underneath. The one that's been waiting for space to speak. That voice doesn't shout. It tells you when something feels wrong. It nudges you toward what's true. And the more time you spend in silence, the louder it becomes, until it's the only voice you trust. This is why solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is longing for others. Solitude is meeting yourself. Loneliness feeds despair. Solitude breeds strength. The Stoics didn't fear being alone. They feared being distracted. They feared being pulled away from themselves. Because a man who can't sit quietly with his thoughts will always be a slave to the world's noise. But ruling yourself doesn't look like dominance. It looks like discipline. The discipline to walk alone when necessary, to think without validation, to act without witnesses. Silence is not weakness. It's refinement. It's the furnace where clarity is forged. There's a point when you stop needing to announce every emotion, when your peace stops being public property. You stop explaining yourself. You stop turning your pain into performance. You hold your truth quietly, like a flame cupped in your hands. Not hidden, just protected, and that unnerves people. Because silence can't be manipulated. It can't be praised, pitied, or consumed. It simply is. That's why the Stoics saw stillness as sacred. When you stop reacting to everything, you begin to see everything. You notice what drains you, what uplifts you, what deserves your time. Your focus sharpens. Your energy returns. Your direction becomes clear. Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Solitude is that awakening. It's when you stop dreaming of who you could be and begin becoming it. Not through words, but through practice. Not through noise, but through stillness. You start keeping small promises to yourself. You rise when you said you would. You do the work even when no one watches. And slowly trust grows. Trust in yourself, the most unshakable form of freedom there is. There's a quiet kind of power in this transformation. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be felt. You walk differently. You speak with fewer words, but each one carries more weight. People notice. They feel your steadiness, even if they can't name it. That's the paradox of solitude. The more time you spend alone, the more connected you become. Not to everyone, but to everything that truly matters. Because you've cleared the noise. You've found your center. You've built an empire within your own mind. And once that happens, once you master the art of being alone without being lonely, you'll never fear silence again. Because now you understand what the Stoics always knew, that the most powerful sound in the world is the one that rises from within your own quiet. There is a certain pain that no one prepares you for, the pain of being overlooked. You give your best. You show your loyalty. You stay when others leave. And still, the world turns away as if your effort was invisible. At first, it feels like injustice. You tell yourself, they didn't see me. They didn't understand. You replay every word, every silence, searching for what you did wrong. But one day the realization hits you with quiet force. Maybe rejection isn't a punishment. Maybe it's protection. What if rejection was never the wall, but the compass? What if every person who left, every door that closed, every silence you mistook for failure, was just redirecting you to something truer, something built only for you? Rejection hurts because it touches something primal, the part of us that longs to belong, to be seen, to be chosen. But the Stoics understood that being unchosen by others can be the first step toward choosing yourself. For years, we build our lives like actors waiting for a cue, expecting others to validate our role. But when no one calls our name, when the applause never comes, that's when we discover something powerful. We don't need a script to live with purpose. Every rejection is a mirror showing you what doesn't align with your path. It doesn't mean you're not enough. It means the place you were trying to fit wasn't yours to begin with. The pain comes from resistance, from trying to force belonging in spaces that were never meant to hold your soul. And maybe rejection is life's way of permitting you, forcing you to prove yourself. Because every time you're pushed away, you are being asked a question. Will you break here, or will you build? It's easy to take rejection personally, to turn it into a story about your worth. But rejection is rarely personal. It's directional. The Stoics believe the universe is not against you. It simply refuses to let you stay where you don't belong. Look closely at the times you were denied something you thought you needed. The job, the love, the approval. Did it not in the end make space for something better? A version of yourself that was freer, clearer, more alive? You see, what blocks your way is often what saves you from wasting your life on the wrong path. Carl Jung wrote, "But becoming who you are requires losing who you were pretending to be." Rejection helps with that. It burns away what's false. It strips you of the masks you wore for acceptance. And in that burning, the real you, the one untouched by applause or judgment, begins to rise. That's the paradox. Rejection feels like loss, but it's actually refinement. It cuts away what doesn't serve you. It teaches you discernment. It gives you back your energy, your focus, your direction. Think of the blacksmith's forge, how fire shapes steel. That's what rejection does to the spirit. It doesn't destroy you. It tempers you. It turns the soft metal of desire into the sharp blade of purpose. They saw every disappointment as material for transformation. When you adopt that mindset, rejection stops being a wound. It becomes instruction. It becomes revelation. Not everyone is meant to understand your path. Some will misread your silence as arrogance, your ambition as distance, your strength as coldness. But that's because they can only see you from the level they stand on. You are climbing a different mountain. The higher you rise in clarity, the smaller the noise below becomes. And slowly, the sting of rejection fades into gratitude. Rejection clears space. Space for alignment. Space for authenticity. Space for peace. It's not a detour. It's direction. So when life tells you no, when the door closes, when the silence stretches longer than your patience, pause. Don't curse the closed path. Listen for the new one opening behind it. Because every rejection is a kind of redirection, a subtle turning of the soul toward where it was always meant to go. And when you learn to see it that way, you stop fearing the word no. You start thanking it. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the person you've been carrying begins to crumble. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in slow erosion. The mask starts to feel heavy. The voice you once used to please others sounds foreign in your mouth. The old habits, the old fears, the old identity, they no longer fit. You feel it first as exhaustion, not the kind that comes from work, but from pretending. Pretending to care, pretending to belong, pretending to be who you once promised others you'd be. That's when the dying begins. And though it feels like loss, it's actually liberation. Sometimes what stands in your way is not the world. It's the version of you that refuses to evolve. The one that clings to comfort, to recognition, to old stories of identity. But the universe, indifferent and wise, will not let you stay small. It will send you endings disguised as failure, silence, rejection. Not to break you, but to burn away what no longer serves you. This is the death of the old self. It's not loud. It's not cinematic in the way we imagine. It's quiet, a slow unraveling. You wake up one day and realize the life you built no longer feels like home. And here lies the paradox. The death of the false self feels like dying, but it's actually the first breath of authenticity. You cannot condemn the old you into disappearing. You must honor it, thank it, and release it. That version of you, the one who sought validation, who bent to be liked, who performed for peace, it got you here. It survived the storms, but it can't walk the next path. To evolve, you must let it go. This is where most people turn back. They mistake the discomfort of transformation for failure. They cling to what's familiar, even if it's killing them slowly. But the Stoics knew that discomfort is sacred. It's the fire that forges a clearer self. And like all fire, it consumes before it creates. You cannot be reborn and remain the same. Something has to die. Maybe it's the need for approval. Maybe it's the identity built on other people's comfort. Maybe it's the endless apologizing for your depth, your focus, your silence. When that version finally burns away, you'll feel raw, stripped, uncertain. You'll speak less. You'll move slower. You'll stop explaining yourself to those who only ever loved your noise. And you'll smile quietly, because for the first time, it's true, you have changed. You've stopped shrinking. You've stopped translating your soul into smaller languages. You've stopped offering yourself to those who feed on your softness but never nourish it. This death, this ending, isn't something to fear. It's something to honor, because death in the Stoic sense isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's the clearing of the soil so new roots can grow. Marcus Aurelius faced this truth daily. He meditated on mortality not to despair, but to remind himself that life's beauty lies in impermanence. That's the essence of rebirth, to live as if you've already died once, and now every breath is borrowed grace. When you reach this point, something shifts. You stop begging the world to validate your existence. You start existing on purpose. You stop performing to be understood. You start acting from understanding. The noise that once pulled you in 100 directions now sounds distant, irrelevant. You move with new weight. Your silence feels different now, not empty but full. It's the silence of someone who no longer needs to prove their worth through volume. It's the calm of a person who's met their darkness and decided to keep walking anyway. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the becoming of one's true self. It's not glamorous. It's not easy, but it's the only journey worth taking. And like every pilgrimage, it requires sacrifice. The sacrifice of your old identity. You will grieve it. You will miss it. And then, one morning, you'll wake up and realize something incredible. You no longer want it back. That's when you know the old self is gone. Not buried in bitterness, but released in peace. In its place stands someone quieter, simpler, stronger. Someone who doesn't chase, doesn't perform, doesn't beg. Someone who simply is, and when others ask what changed, you won't have words. Because transformation doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself through presence. You are no longer defined by who left, by what ended, by what broke. You are defined by what remained, the consciousness that stayed, the discipline that endured, the light that refused to go out. The death of the old self is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of authorship. The moment you stop being written by others and start writing yourself. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk into the room demanding to be seen. It doesn't shout its victories or defend its worth. It simply is. That is quiet power, the final form of mastery. For most of your life, you believed strength was loud, that to be powerful was to be praised, to win was to be witnessed, to matter was to be remembered. But when you've walked through solitude, rejection, and the slow death of the false self, you realize the opposite is true. Real power needs no witness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "That's not a metaphor, it's a map." The Stoics knew that mastery begins the moment you stop trying to control the world and start mastering the world within. Look around. The loudest ones often lack peace. The show of confidence hides an absence of clarity. But the man who has conquered his own reactions, who can stand in the chaos and remain unmoved, that man cannot be taken from. That man is free. This kind of freedom is not built overnight. It's forged in the same silence that once terrified you. It's built from the discipline of showing up when no one claps, from the strength of choosing restraint over reaction, from the grace of walking away without explanation. Quiet power is not coldness, it's composure. It's what happens when you've outgrown the need to prove yourself. When you realize that peace is not found in the noise of approval, but in the calm of alignment. And the throne of that empire is silence. Not the silence of avoidance, the silence of understanding. The silence that no longer rushes to explain, defend, or persuade. The silence that knows truth doesn't need to shout. Imagine standing in a room full of noise, arguments, opinions, judgments swirling like a storm. Most will fight to be heard. But the Stoic stands still, listening. He doesn't react. Because he knows peace isn't found in being right, it's found in being unmoved. Quiet power is born in that inferno. In the nights when you faced your fears without witness. In the mornings you rose without encouragement. It's born in every decision you made to stay kind in an unkind world, to stay calm when provoked, to choose virtue when ego begged for attention. You don't reach mastery by avoiding pain. You reach it by refining it, by taking the chaos that once ruled you and shaping it into clarity, by taking your emotions, those wild horses, and learning to ride them, not be dragged by them. There is beauty in that restraint, the kind that others can feel without you saying a word. When you walk into a room now, your presence says more than your mouth ever could, because peace, real peace, carries weight. It's not passive, it's magnetic. People will sense it. They'll wonder what changed, why you no longer react, why you no longer chase, why you no longer bend to fit their story. And the answer is simple. You no longer need the noise to feel alive. You've met yourself in silence, and that meeting has made you whole. Quiet power is that, not talking about virtue, but embodying it. Not performing goodness, but living it. Not posting your growth, but practicing it. The less you seek control, the more command you have. The less you try to be impressive, the more unforgettable you become. Because people trust what is still. They respect what is centered. They follow what doesn't follow the crowd. In a world addicted to attention, restraint becomes rebellion. In a world that overshares, privacy becomes power. And in a world desperate to be heard, silence becomes a roar. This is where the journey ends, and where it truly begins. Not on the battlefield, not in the applause. You no longer need to be seen to exist fully. You no longer need to be understood to walk clearly. You no longer need to be loved to act with love. You have become self-sustaining. You have become your own source. You have built the empire within. So now, when the world turns away, you remain steady. When they misunderstand you, you remain kind. When they doubt you, you continue. Because your strength was never theirs to give. That's Stoicism. That's mastery. That's what it means to be truly alive. The journey began with silence, and it ends with it too. But this silence is different. It no longer feels like absence. It feels like arrival, because you've learned the final truth, that the greatest victory a human being can ever achieve is not conquering the world, but conquering themselves.